Society Matters.
Welcome, everyone, to our next installment of the podcast Legacy Chronicles, Honoring the Past and Shaping the Future. I'm your host, Donna Rosenblum, the Director of Education here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, and I have the great fortune of having my guest today, Jack Hersh.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful that you're here, and we're going to be talking about many things. Jack is a second generation, and he is going to talk about many of those aspects of being a 2G. But first, let's start off by just giving the audience a brief understanding of your father's story. So just give us the little highlights of your father's journey, what happened, and
sure, the 30,000-foot view.
Yes, exactly.
So he was a Transylvanian Jew from a town called Dej. When he was 18 years old, he was put in a cattle car and sent to Auschwitz. It was June of 1944. After 3 days in Auschwitz, they sent him on to Mauthausen, and then from Mauthausen to one of their satellite camps called Gusen. Mauthausen, Gusen, and a lot of camps in the Western Austrian area were there because Austria was, well, to say it the other way, granite is indigenous to Austria, particularly Western Austria. And so these camps were created to mine the granite because Hitler was building a 1,000-year Reich, and if you're going to build a 1,000-year Reich, you've got to have granite. So my father worked in the granite mines there. He started out as a 160-pounder, just under 6 foot tall, ended up at 80 pounds by the time he got around to the winter or early 1945. In late 1944, they moved him up to Mauthausen from Gusen. He ended up in an area called the tent camp, which was a tent facility, a series of tents just outside the main Mauthausen walls that were considered the most abominable place in all of Mauthausen, which itself was considered the most abominable place in all of Europe to be in a concentration camp. He was there through the end of the month of March, and in April 1945, they started death marches. They had about 25,000 Jews in this tent camp. They needed to eliminate them to the extent that they could. Not that easy to gas 25,000 Jews, so they put them on the road, 1,000 Jews a day, starting in April 1st, April 2nd. My father was in one of those very early marches, and about 8 miles outside of the camp, he escaped. He was captured a few hours later, returned to the camp the next day and not killed. 2 weeks later, he was put on another death march. He escaped again. And this time he was found by a local family that hid him for 3 weeks until the Americans came through and he was rescued. And then he spent 1.5 years in a hospital, went to Israel, came to the United States. That catches you up.
And yes. Your father's name, we didn't get
David
that.
Hersh.
Okay, David Hersh. So, so for the audience, Mauthausen was one, is when we talked, there were 44,000 camps in 1944 all throughout Europe.
Right.
It's an unbelievable number. It's hard to even imagine. And as you said, many of them were slave labor, specifically for the war effort, mining, granite, munitions, all sorts of things that these laborers were doing. But Mauthausen had that quarry.
Well, Mauthausen had more than the quarry. Mauthausen, all the camps were rated. They were rated level 1, 2, or 3. Stufe is the German word. Mauthausen was the only camp, along with its satellite camp Gusen, where my dad was, that were rated level 3. Auschwitz was a 1 as a frame of comparison. So if you were sent to Mauthausen, you were sent to be killed. Most of the other camps, you weren't sent to be killed. You were sent to be worked.
To be worked, right.
And
besides the death camps. Those are different kind of things.
And if you died, you died. They weren't necessarily killing you, except, of course, for the death camps themselves, like Treblinka and Birkenau.
Right, those were different entities.
Yes.
But Mauthausen was a slave labor camp where you were worked to death.
Correct.
There's no question. From my research and knowledge, Jews were always given the worst work details, that particularly those stairs of death that they talk about at Mauthausen.
Very often.
And you didn't survive more than a few days or maybe a week doing that kind of labor where you had to walk up and down 185 flights of steps, stone steps, hauling rock, and with no food and all of that kind of stuff. Really, really difficult.
But what was unique about Mauthausen and Gusen also is that they weren't initially designed for Jews. Jews were only sent there starting, for the most part, in 1944. There were apparently some Dutch Jews that were sent there in 41 or 42, but for the most part, it was for criminals, for communists, for people that the Nazis did not want in their society.
Right.
But they needed a granite to mine the granite. They were running out of people to kill, and then they started sending Jews there in 1944 in large numbers.
Okay. So your father comes to the United States, obviously marries, has a family, continues his life. As a child, are you an only child?
No, I have a brother 4 years younger.
You have a brother 4 years younger. So growing up in that household, we talked to a lot of 2Gs, and there are certain similarities of being a second generation. At what age did you have any first of all, did you have any inkling growing up that your father was a survivor? Did he talk about your situation? Were there things that maybe he did that were different than other of your friends' fathers? What do you remember?
Well, it was, for all the stories I've heard about 2Gs, I think my upbringing was very unique. From my earliest memories, very earliest memories, I knew my dad was a survivor. He was a good-looking, just ask him, a good-looking, engaging guy who liked to tell stories, and he escaped twice from the Nazis. And as I would tell people, if you escaped twice from the Nazis, you'd be telling people.
Yeah.
So he always talked about his stories, and we lived in a town called Long Beach on the South Shore of Long Island. Most of, if not all of my father's and my parents' friends were survivors, or at least one half of the couple were survivors. They all talked about it. They would play poker or gin rummy on Saturday nights and laugh about some of their experiences, which is incredible to hear, but that's what they did.
Right. That was their therapy, maybe.
That was their therapy. That's how they got through this. So my experience as a 2G, and my brothers as well, was that we always knew about our father's experience. It was built into the fabric of our lives. And he wasn't morose about it. He wasn't laughing about it.
Right.
It was a horrific experience. He talked about plenty of nights where he got 2 or 3 hours of sleep and had nightmares. But for the most part, it appeared to us not to really intersect with anything negative in our lives.
Right. So he tried to give you as much of a normal childhood, loving family.
We had exactly that.
All of that.
We had. My mother was Israeli, Sabra, 6th generation. They met in Israel. I was born in Israel, came here when I was a few months old. She was a classic Sabra, little prickly on the outside, very warm on the inside. but my mom nonetheless. And they had a loving relationship, and we had a normal household, for lack of a better way to describe it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Again, everybody's experience is different, so I always like to be able to reference that. Do you, besides, obviously your father went through an unbelievable, horrific situation, and you said that there were times where there were nightmares and things like that. Were there any other experiences that you remember growing up that, again, some 2G will talk about when their parents, particularly their survivor parent, would enter a room. They would check everything out. They would know where the exits are. They would be ready. Food is always one of those issues that many survivors have a interesting relationship with food. Just things like that. Was do you remember any of that kind of stuff?
The short answer is no, but. Because really, the things you described were not sort of in our lives. Okay. But my father, every Passover, during the Seder, during the reading of the Haggadah, the Haggadah just describes the Jews' escape or departure from the Exodus from Egypt 1,100 years, well, I guess 3,100 years from now ago. My father would always digress in the middle of that talk to tell about his escapes from concentration camp. And he started telling that, again, from my earliest memories. And because we grew up Orthodox, we had 2 Seders, so we heard it twice every year.
Wow.
So we knew the story cold by the time we were 10 years old. I think maybe that was the one single unique thing that I could think about that sort of set us apart. We didn't have family and friends over for Passover because, as Orthodox, you couldn't travel. And we didn't have, our friends had their own seders, so it was just us. And we just got to hear that story over and over again.
Right. So did your father have any, was he the only survivor of his family?
No, actually, so he was one of 8 brothers and sisters. His parents, his father, my grandfather, who I'm named after, died 4 weeks before they were shipped to concentration camp. He had a heart attack. My grandmother and 4 of my father's 7 siblings, so 4 out of the 8 were killed immediately in Birkenau. My father and 3 others survived. A much older brother. My father was the youngest of the 8, so a much older brother, a somewhat older brother, then a somewhat older sister.
Okay. And where did they wound up?
So after the war, they all went back to their hometown, and then my father went to Israel a year and a half after he came back to his hometown. His oldest brother went to Turkey, started a chemical factory. The family business was a small soap factory. He went to Turkey, started a chemical factory, sold it in the 1970s, and went to Israel, Netanya. And the other brother and sister, the brother went to Israel, Netanya, 3 or 4 years after the war ended, and the sister in the late 1950s, she left from Hungary or Romania at that point onto Israel. So they all ended up in Netanya within a couple of blocks from each other.
Right. Oh, that's unbelievable. And your father used to visit and go to
My
Israel
father
regularly.
used to visit 3-4 times a year.
And what about you? Did you go as well?
So starting in 1971, we really couldn't afford it before then, but starting in 1971, I went every year and a half until I got out of college. And then it was every number of years.
All right. So when we talk about being a 2G, there's a lot to unpack with being a 2G.
No question.
You know, your father was very open about the story, but I know from reading the book that you were kind of surprised after he passed that there was a lot that you didn't know.
There was one thing in particular that I seemed not to know, that he went back to the camp.
Yes.
For most of his life, he abhorred anything German cars, German language, German accent. Yet in the late 1990s, without telling me, one of his trips to Israel, he went back and he went to visit the concentration camp. I didn't know that until my cousin in Israel, the daughter of my father's sister, surviving sister, told me that he told her after he went to the concentration camp, then went on to Israel to relate his experiences. I never got any of the details of the experiences, but he had gone back, and that was kind of a shock to me.
Right. Any thinking of why? Like, have you at this point thinking about it for all these years? Did you have any idea why your father didn't tell you?
I don't. I mean, the question of why he went is, I think, pretty clear. Yeah. I think at some point he just felt he needed to go back.
Right. Yeah.
Why he didn't tell me, there were a lot of things he didn't tell me. When he would tell the stories of his experiences in concentration camp, he would always either preface or end the comments by saying, what he's telling me is 10% of what really happened. He's leaving 90% of it out of it. And in researching the book, I learned what some of that 90% might have been. For instance, appels, the morning and evening roll calls, exactly. He never discussed them. Yet if you read other people's memoirs, they are a significant part of their horror and being in the camps. My father never breathed a word of it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that he didn't tell me. I haven't really dwelled on it, but it's certainly a factor that, look, the other side of the coin is he talked about it more than 99% of the survivors. So
he told you what he felt you needed to know, and maybe he, didn't want to traumatize you, and maybe going back to Mauthausen was just his own therapy, like he needed to do it, and it was just for him.
There's no question. It was just for him.
It was just for him, and I can respect that. So
yeah, but he had a phrase. He had a lot of phrases. Not he spoke 9 languages or 10. He used to say then there was the 9, and then he used to say, if I don't understand it, then it's Greek to me. So it was 10. But he used to say that he had these phrases, and one of them was, "You should never know." And invariably, when he would tell these stories about incidences in the camps, he would always sort of cap them by saying, "You should never know." And I think that sort of summarized his view of anything negative in my life. That if he could avoid telling me, he would avoid telling me. And I think one of those things was his trip back to in the late 1990s.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I read the book, there was a particular moment that really resonated with me and stuck out. And you talked about after your father had passed, and it was at the funeral or the Shiva, I don't remember. And there were all these people there that you didn't know who they were. And you were like kind of perplexed, and you went over to them and said, you know, how did you know my dad, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, you know, talked about how your father used to walk the boardwalk and schmooze with everyone and talk with everyone and ask how they were. And these people were like, your father was the greatest, kindest, nicest person ever. And in the book you say, you know, I just want to be like that. Like, that's such a noble thing that your father went through all of these things, and yet he took the time out of his day every day to ask other people how they were. Remarkable.
You summed it up perfectly.
I almost cried when I read that.
He was the nicest guy anybody ever knew.
Yeah.
And yet he went through some of the worst experiences anybody ever could have imagined going through. So go figure that.
Yeah.
But that's who he was. And yeah, it was at his funeral. There was this group of people that I had no idea who they were. There was the neighbor across the street that I didn't really know.
Right.
There were people who just happened to be on the boardwalk at the same time of day every day. That was the thing, walking the boardwalk, particularly as you retired. And my dad was retired in his mid-60s. He was lucky enough to be able to do that. And he just patrolled the boardwalk once or twice a day and had friends, and they somehow found out about his passing, and they came.
Yeah, it's wonderful. That particular, you know, really, I thought was very, very powerful. So let's talk about you and your journey and why you wrote the book, why you went back to trace your father's path, why you have taken this on as a mission that you feel compelled, and you are a member of our hmTV volunteer. 2G, you come and you speak to students a couple of times a year or more.
Many more than that, yeah, sure.
You know, and it's an extremely important thing, but not every 2G feels that way. So tell us about your journey.
Well, there's a few aspects to it. So it starts with my cousin calling me up and telling me that she found a picture of my dad on the internet. My dad had died in 2001. In 2007, 6 years later, he suddenly appears on the internet in a search that my cousin in Israel had done for her mom, you know, the last name Hersh, and unusual spelling, Hersch, and all of a sudden this picture of my dad shows up on the Mauthausen website.
Right, the picture on the book, right?
The picture on the book.
Yes. Is it this
actually,
picture?
No.
No?
It's
a different one?
It's a headshot photo.
Okay.
That it was taken when he was 17 years old, and he was a model in his hometown. I told you he thought he was good looking.
Yeah, well, he is a good looking man.
So,
you know, even on that picture, he's good looking.
But what's interesting about this picture, this headshot photo, is I don't own it, which led me to write to the concentration camp and ask them how in the world they got this photo of my dad and put it on their concentration camp website, which led to a multi-year odyssey of digging and talking to historians attached to the camp and not attached to the camp about what his experience was. Of course, in their website, they said that he'd escaped once because the historian that got that picture, and that's a whole story in itself, but that historian talked to the family that had found him when he escaped the second time and had hid him for 3 weeks. My dad gave him that photograph when he met them actually a year and a half after the war ended, but he only told him about he didn't tell him about any escapes. What he didn't do is he didn't tell him about his first escape. It was like, I mean, you think about it. It's like after they found him this second time, he didn't say to them, "Oh, thank God you found me. I escaped once before." And he
figured it's not necessary.
He didn't go into that.
Yeah, no.
So they only knew about one, and I told them about the second, and it led to this multi-year experience of emails back and forth about what really had happened. But then it kind of like sort of die is too strong of a word. It kind of wasn't forefront of my mind. I'd gone through a divorce. I was in the financial markets, and the markets had that very rough 2008, 2009, 2010. In the mid-2010s, I was at a business dinner. And, you know, I told my dad's story to people who would ask, or if it would somehow come up, or the war would come up. And somehow, and I don't remember why, but somehow at this dinner, the story came up.
Right.
And I told the story of my dad's escaping twice and what happened to him and on and on. The next day, I get a phone call from one of the guys at dinner who said, that story changed my life. I don't know any survivors. I hardly know very many Jewish people. I've never heard of anything like this in my life, and it changed my life. It is the things that are important to me now are different than the things that were important to me before you told that story. And I thought to myself, if that's true of this guy, that's got to be true of a lot of people who would hear this story. So I decided I'm going to write this. I did a lot of writing anyway for work, and I figured, why not?
Right.
And at the same time, I cranked up the effort to learn more about the story. I arranged to go with the camp to meet somebody at the camp and to go try to figure out where he was in the camp, where he worked, where he escaped, just the whole thing.
The whole journey.
The whole journey. And so I got on a plane, went there, I believe it was early 2016, and the result was all the things that I learned and I put in the book. But but if there's a seminal reason as to why I wrote it, it was that dinner where it suddenly occurred to me that there's value to this story,
of course,
for other people to hear it.
Absolutely, and that's what we do here.
Right, and that's the generic point of it. As far as Jews are concerned, particularly with what's been going on over the last few years, and really particularly after October 7th, I think it's important that we never forget that people realize that we're not just people who went to slaughter, but some of us tried to fend for themselves or look out for themselves.
We have a rich history. There's a lot there that we don't only want to be seen as
exactly. And my father's story, I think, fits within the fabric of that, and so I tell it as much as I can.
And it has a happy ending in the sense that.
I actually know people who are hesitant to read it because some of the concentration camp books obviously are very difficult to read, and I've said, the ending. He lives.
Right. Right.
So
yes, it's fabulous. It's very well written.
Thank you. I mean, I wouldn't,
so. To say I enjoyed it. Again.
Right.
But
I get it.
All right. But it was so eye-opening. So I really did love it.
I tried to write it somewhat the way my father would tell it. Again, he wasn't laughing about it.
Right.
Although he did smile on occasion when you would think, then why in the world is he smiling at this point? But I tried to write it in a little bit of his voice. In fact, his voice is in there.
Is there? Yes.
He was not a downbeat guy, and I didn't want this story to be a downbeat story, and so I tried to write it in a way that it wasn't. And you're telling me I made it.
You were successful.
Thank you.
And as I said, it was a pleasure to read. I do a lot of reading on many Holocaust books and memoirs, and I learned a lot. But it was. You felt like you were having a conversation with your father as you were reading it, which was the point. Which is beautiful.
Good. Yes. I appreciate you saying that.
No. So we're kind of at the end of our podcast, and I do want to just bring up, obviously your father lived in Israel. You were born in Israel. You have traveled to Israel many, many times in your life. His family, his surviving family, lived in Israel, and how has what has happened, and you touched on it a little bit, since October 7th and in today's world with the social media and so much of the misinformation, and how does that strengthen your mission? How do you feel your father would feel about all of this?
Well, the short answer is yes. It strengthens my mission to an extreme degree. I think that, people have learned to equate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and it should be equated because, after all, Israel, Judaism, Jude in German, Jude, that comes from the land of Judea. We are indigenous people in Israel, and so hearing all the things that I hear and read about that where Jews are colonists or Jews don't belong there or it's the Arabs' land, I think that getting the story out about the Jews generically and getting out the story about what happened in the Holocaust and how Israel is the creation, the modern creation of the state of Israel is an immediate outgrowth of the Holocaust. You got to put that in context, and telling the story of the Holocaust is part of that context.
Of the long history, the long struggle.
Right, exactly. I think what's happened in Gaza is a horrific tragedy.
No, I don't think anybody would disagree. It's horrible.
I think many American and Israelis American Jews and Israelis don't like the Netanyahu regime, for lack of a better term.
Protesting against the conservative government for
Yes.
a whole year before October 7th.
I think what Israelis are doing now is probably the wrong tactic currently. But at the end of the day, if you look at the Hamas point of view, if you look at the PLO point of view, if you look at the general Arab population point of view, Israel doesn't exist to them. They don't want Israel there. They want
There's no peace.
Israel gone. There's no, a two-state solution would be an interim solution for them. So even though a two-state solution sounds great on paper, it's not what they want. The PLO flag has Israel covered by rifles and a grenade. And Hamas, it goes without saying, their charter has Israel destroyed. So where's the middle ground? They start with no middle ground, from the river to the sea. That means no Israel.
Right.
And so what's Israel supposed to do? What they're doing, yes, is probably a little further, is too far.
It's okay to be critical. Yep.
And it's okay to be critical, but
course.
it's not okay to say that
They don't have a right to exist as
exactly.
a state.
And until the Arabs, until the Arab general population and the Palestinians specifically accept the creation of the state of Israel and accept Israel's right to be there, this war is not going to end.
Yeah, it is a very complicated, complex issue that cannot be debated on TikTok. All right? I mean, I think we agree on that. But anyway, I just wanted to get your thoughts, and I want to say thank you so much for being on our podcast, sharing your experiences. To read the book, as I said, it's definitely give a plug. It is a very eye-opening read. And for all of us out there, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Donna Rosenblum. Please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you.